Hi there, welcome to IndyCar on Sunday the 3rd of March. Now, forgive me if my voice sounds a little bit weird. I've got a bad chest infection and I'm feeling pretty awful today. But the subjects I want to talk about today are important, so it's important that I keep these programs going. Now, in keeping with the topic that I've been following for the last few weeks, and that is the imposition of Freeport on Scottish territory by the English state, I thought it worth exploring the topic a little further. Now, Alf Baird, Professor Alf Baird, published a piece today on social media looking at freeports and what it actually means for those parts of Scotland which have been designated as freeport areas. Now, one of the interesting things about freeports is that historically a freeport normally, in the way they are used across the planet in most situations, is normally these are ports, they're seaports, and usually they're container ports. And the purpose of freeports in most situations is for goods coming in containers to be then redirected from the freeport to somewhere elsewhere on the planet without incurring any taxes or duties. So they're usually way stations where companies, usually multinational shipping companies and storage companies, operate in a way which allows them to basically forward freight from one part of the world to another. However, what is being proposed for the Scottish freeports, and in fact all of the so-called British freeports, is something very, very different. And that means the freeports which the Tories are proposing are not just way stations for goods going from, let's say, Europe to other parts of the world via ports here in Scotland, but something completely insidious. And that is, if you look at the locations of these freeports, they're in areas where renewable energy comes ashore, and that is wind energy, offshore wind energy, and in future a lot more tidal energy. And you might be wondering why I'm even mentioning this. How does that affect the freeport? Well, what it means is that energy coming from Scotland's offshore energy arrays, which whether they be wind or tidal, are basically funneled through the freeports and then straight back out again to basically foreign customers without any of that energy generated from Scotland's actual energy resources paying any taxation at all in the UK. So that means these are being used to avoid paying taxes on profits made by British companies which are siphoning energy from Scotland's wind energy resources and selling them abroad without any of the benefits coming to Scotland at all. Now, you might think, oh yes, but what about all the jobs? Well, the jobs involved in the renewable energy sector, mostly in Scotland, are from companies from abroad, most notably Norwegian companies and other Scandinavian operators who have built and operate some of our largest wind farms. And you might be thinking, well, why aren't the wind turbines built in Scotland? That's a great question. Why aren't they built in Scotland? They should really be built in Scotland and operated by Scottish companies. But then that would be to miss the point. The point here is for Scottish companies to be shut out of this entire process to enable multinational corporations to basically remove that energy from the Scottish sector and sell it abroad without it ever paying any taxation here in the UK, or more particularly in Scotland itself. So there aren't really any massive job benefits to this. Maybe some supply chain companies might be able to operate inside these areas, but the workforce that works for them will not be subject to or protected by the usual worker protections that exist currently in Scotland. That would be things like minimum wages, number of hours you can work, things like sickness benefits. All the rest of that would not apply. And in fact, the entire Freeport areas, and there are two of them in northeast and southeast Scotland, those entire areas are not under the purview of the local authorities that they are nested in. These are cuckoos in the nest. The local authority is only allowed one representative on the board of what is basically a private limited company in the UK, which will run that entire area. So in other words, a private company located in the UK is going to run an entire local authority area for its own purposes, for the purpose of evading taxation. So this is not a good thing. And one of the other things that Alf Baird was highlighting is the fact that fracking, something which we thought we had stopped using Scottish Local Planning Authority restrictions, is now going to be possible, because any area within the Freeport zone, and remember it extends all the way from the Firth of Forth right the way up to Grangemouth and Falkirk, that entire area could be fracked. In fact, they might even be able to extend it further inland, and fracking can then be done, because the normal rules applied by the local authorities don't apply in Freeports. So fracking could come back against our will. Again, we didn't want fracking in the first place, but it might happen under the Freeports. So the idea that the SNP could paint the Freeports green by insisting on certain standards being applied is probably just not going to happen, because there will be no legislation actually available to make these things happen. Now, the second part of today's programme is looking at anti-Semitism. I understand that today, in fact in the middle of today, in the middle of Glasgow, there is to be a march, an anti-Semitism march by Scottish Jews who are worried about their own safety. Now, before I get launched into this, let's make a distinction between anti-Semitism and Zionism. They are not the same thing. There are plenty of Jews all over the world who are alarmed and shocked by the carnage that is currently going on in Palestine, and feel that it is a massive overreaction and would support a ceasefire. However, the fact that anti-Semitism is so easily conflated with Zionism means that there is a risk that there may be agents provocateur around these marches, whose purpose is solely to cause chaos, perhaps intimidation and violence as a result of their presence there. And I'm particularly worried by what Rishi Sunak said in the last few days, where he said that there were forces inside the UK trying to tear the country apart. And I think particularly he is referring to forces who want a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, I don't think that anybody marching supporting anti-Semitism, supporting the rights of Jews to peaceful life here in Scotland, have anything to do with what's going on in Israel. For the most part, people are peaceful and law-abiding, and they just want to live their lives in peace. And they certainly don't agree with the mass slaughter of civilians, even though the Hamas attack on the 7th of October, if I remember correctly, was a horrible act. They murdered 1,200 people and took over 250 people hostage. Now, bad as that was, the reaction to it from the Israeli Defence Forces has been huge. I mean, let's face it, over 30,000 civilians have died indirectly in the fighting that's gone on in Gaza, as the Israeli Defence Forces have gone in to destroy Hamas fighters. Now, the Hamas fighters are obviously heavily dug in beneath the structures of civilian buildings, and that puts every civilian at risk. Now, Hamas has obviously done that on purpose to make it difficult for the Israeli Defence Force to get at them, and in the process, effectively, they have used their own civilians as shields. All of which is horrible, and I'm not condoning what Hamas has done. I think it's disgusting using your own people as shields in this way. However, the overreaction by the Israeli Defence Forces is completely over the top. It really is. A ceasefire would benefit both sides, because a ceasefire would mean the killing would stop, the civilians could be evacuated, the civilians who are still trapped, the Palestinians trapped in Rafah could be evacuated. The Israelis may then have a chance to negotiate a prisoner swap to get back all the remaining hostages who are still alive after all this carnage, and there will be some who have died in the process of these attacks. So I see a ceasefire as something perfectly reasonable. It's peace. It's not asking for one side to benefit over the other. It's just simply asking for the fighting to stop so that people who are not fighting, who are perfectly innocent, can be evacuated. That way, the business of prisoner swaps, getting hostages back, and finding a lasting peace can actually be achieved. So this march in Glasgow today, I'm worried about it because of what Rishi Sunak has said. This business of claiming that there's been intimidation and that there's division in the United Kingdom is, I think, a false flag. Now that brings me to the last part of today's show, which is George Galloway's amazing success in the Rochdale by-election recently. Now I am definitely not a fan of George Galloway, not because of his political position with Palestine, but because of his political position against Scottish independence. However, his win in Rochdale is remarkable, but then not unexpected. For some bizarre reason, Sir Keir Starmer did not field a Labour candidate in that particular by-election, one where there was a very strong Labour, historical Labour backbone, if you like, in the north of England. But all of that has been swept away. Labour a distant second, the Tories a very distant third, and in fact all of the other parties combined against George Galloway still didn't get as many votes as he did. So despite the fact that I don't like the guy, and I find his attitude to his own home country absolutely disgusting, that he wouldn't support Scotland's independence, but he would support the independence of the Palestinians over the Israelis, baffling. However, one of the things that I do agree on is that the claims that were made about the way Galloway won, certainly by the British media, who have said that there have been alleged claims of intimidation during that general election. Galloway pointed out in his interviews that the presiding officer at that general election said that the election was free and fair. Never mentioned anything about any intimidation or any investigations into any parties or any activists, and yet we're hearing that there was alleged intimidation. So when Rishi Sunak started going on about intimidation, it started alarm bells ringing in my mind that any kind of protest which was made, either by people protesting, wanting a ceasefire, or people like today's march who are against anti-Semitism and marching in favour of that position, both these parties, both these positions are at risk of agents provocateur on the streets, trying to stir up trouble so that Rishi Sunak can be vindicated and say, well, I told you so. What Sunak is doing is almost exactly what Trump did before the storming of the Capitol in the United States and the denial of the electoral result in America. It's very dangerous when any mainstream politician starts coming out with populist garbage like this on a mainstream news channel, especially when he does so outside number 10 Downing Street and makes it official. So the way the United Kingdom is looking at the moment is that Rishi Sunak appears to be trying to enable this dissent, this division that he claims is already here, to be actually happen on the streets. And it worries me that something may happen which has been stirred up by British agents provocateur, perhaps BNP members or whoever else is imported on buses to disrupt such marches. All the time Sunak can say, well, I told you so. These are dark forces and this is what happens when people march on the streets for a ceasefire, which is exactly the kind of thing that everybody wants. So, unfortunately, this kind of populist garbage, this divisive garbage which is coming out of the mouths of so many supposedly democratic governments across the West is very worrying, because it plays into the hands of people like Vladimir Putin, who would benefit from the instability that it creates. Anyway, I am running out of voice with which to speak to you any further today, but suffice to say, I think what Sunak is doing is highly dangerous and inflammatory. There were even suggestions that Sunak might declare some kind of state of emergency and thus avoid having any kind of general election, allowing an unelected, unwanted leader such as Sunak to remain in power long after he should have gone. However, we shall see what happens next. But anyone who is going on the march today, the march in favour of anti-Semitism march, which is a worthy cause. Jewish people have been persecuted since before World War II. And I think it is worthwhile marching to reinforce that Jewish people living anywhere in the world should be safe, just in the same way that Muslim people anywhere in the world should be safe, or Christian people, or secularists like myself who don't have a religion to call their own, or don't believe in God. All of us have the right to protest about anything we want, and we should be able to do that safely. And I think that Sunak is undermining that. Anyway, that's my message for you today. Lots to think about. Freeports are going to be a catastrophe. We all knew this. And the idea of a green Freeport, frankly, is just not going to happen. I think we'll see fracking back, and we'll see our offshore wind energy being exported away from Scotland without ever paying any taxes here. We'll see no benefits from our own resources. It's just another theft. And that is what Freeports are all about. I'll see you later. Bye-bye for now.